WellsRetirementSolutions.com.
21st Century Radio is sponsored by Hieronimus and Company. This is Talk Radio 680 WCBM. It's time now for award-winning 21st Century Radio with your host, Dr. Zoh Hieronimus.
Everybody needs a helping hand. Take a look at your fellow man and tell me, what can I do today? 'Cause everybody needs a helping out. If that ain't what it's all about, tell me what can I do? What can I do today?
Welcome to 21st Century Radio. I'm Dr. Zohara Hieronimus. Laura Courtner is our executive producer, and Anita Brockington runs our board. I think on occasion, or perhaps often, people believe that psychics, mediums, sensitives can turn on and off their abilities to see, to feel, to hear, to touch the unseen presences of either ghosts, spirits, or angelic assistants. Our guest, Rob Gutro, author, medium, and I add meteorologist, we'll have to get an update on the weather, will explain it is for him as it is for me. I have not found the off switch. Rob Gutro has joined us in the past to talk about his own conversations with deceased animals. Tonight he joins us to talk about his journey to England, his encounters there of both ghosts and spirits, and there is a big difference, as he'll explain. His recent 2018 release, Ghosts of England on a Medium's Vacation, is a great excursion as a book. I love sharing airtime with Rob for his clarity, his sense of humor, and genuine regard for the living, and as Matata the bonobo, now deceased herself, once said to me, and those not now in physical body, or she'd say those not here now, that he engages and assists when needed to cross over into the light. Thank you for rejoining us on 21st Century Radio, Rob.
Thank you, Dr. Zoh, for having me back. I really appreciate it.
Well, what a pleasure. So why don't you first tell us, there are always new listeners, how you became aware of your own gift as a medium?
Sure. It was kind of a surprise. Basically, I was a teenager, and my grandfather appeared in full color 6 months after he died in front of me when I was home alone, and scared the living daylights out of me. And when I told my mother, she actually was not surprised, because it turned out she had the gift, but she was afraid to use it. And then my grandfather also, I found out, had the gift.
How
so it ran in my family.
How interesting. And they never told you or never discussed it in front of you as a child?
No, they never bothered to tell me until I got the surprise.
How fascinating. How old were you?
I was 13.
Wow. And that's fairly unusual, particularly a while back. Now it's not so uncommon because parents are more aware of it. But how did it affect your life and your relationship? I don't know if you have other siblings, but with your friends.
Well, I never told anybody about it except for my mother and father.
I got it.
So, and as I grew older, things happened on occasion, but I was so distracted by growing up and trying to focus my life on my career that I basically blotted things out. And as we discussed on a previous show.
Do you find that yeah, we have. Do you find that that's fairly common among people who discover they have the gift, but are either too young or not in a situation where they can use it, that they just sort of go, well, not going to use that one?
Yes, I think that they get distracted and they ignore it until they're settled in their lives, which is what happened to me.
Which makes sense, because it is very dissettling, or unsettling, I guess is the accurate word, for even those of us that are adults when we do it. So why do you think it is that it can't just be turned on and off? I mean, even though we can say we can ignore it, yes, you can ignore it, that's not the same thing as turning it on and off.
Well, I likened the experiences I had in England with having someone stand behind me and call my name about 10 to 20 times, and finally you just have to turn around and say, okay, what do you want? So when they're strong enough, you really have to pay attention. They really don't give you a choice.
Well, and you talk about that, so maybe we should do some basics, as you do so beautifully in this book, Ghosts of England on a Medium's Vacation, about energy, because everything is energy, and I think the explanations you give are quite clear and very useful.
Well, thank you. So basically, what we have physical energies that run through our bodies, and there's a law that we call the law of conservation of energy that states that energy cannot be destroyed; it can only be transformed. So that physical energy that runs through our body couples with our memories, our personality, and our knowledge, and that's where we make a choice in the afterlife. After our physical body dies, we choose to stay here, earthbound, which I call a ghost, or we cross over and join the energies of the cosmos or heaven or Valhalla, what I call a spirit. So, as I like to say, it's about location, location, location.
Yeah, it's good. Works in real estate. Why not real estate above?
That's
As
right.
above, so below. I always find that so interesting. Somebody once told me, well, if you want to know how you eat spiritual food, meaning the wisdom, how do you prepare your table for a meal? And I thought it was a really good way to make very complex things very simple. You then talk, as you mentioned, there's a big difference between a ghost and a spirit. So explain to us, relative to this energy reality, what is a ghost and what is a spirit?
Well, they are the same energies, and it's just because of where they choose to dwell in the afterlife. So ghosts remain earthbound, usually to a fixed place that they're either familiar with in life or a place where they passed, perhaps a battlefield or a hospital, or a place where they grew up, some place that they liked in life. It doesn't have to be a tragedy where they decide to stay. Maybe they don't want to leave their house for the rest of eternity. Spirits, on the other hand, are roam free in the cosmos. If you think about gamma rays and X-rays that traverse the cosmos, spirits are like that. They can go anywhere, anytime.
Which is why people will say you can call upon somebody who has crossed over, a deceased elder, an ancestor, somebody who lived 10,000 years ago, and by focusing our attention on them consciously, either through a picture or sounding their name or praying about them, we come into rapport with their presence. But I've always wondered, this one little thing has always interested me. So what happens when a soul reincarnates, though, to a spirit that was in spirit world, and then what?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, certainly we don't know all the answers, but my thought on reincarnation is that we all come back, but we wait until every contemporary that we know in life has passed before we start coming back.
Oh, that's an interesting perspective.
Do
you find that because of all the work you've done, or because that's something you've been schooled in?
That's because of the work I've done. That's because of all the people and pets that I've spoken to on the other side.
So you mentioned just prior that some people upon death become a ghost. They may be attached to their house. They may be a victim. We've talked about this on many shows over the last 30 years with a variety of guests. Murder, sudden car accidents, unexpected deaths where people don't expect, mass shootings, airplane crashes, all these horrible things war now and in the past. Why do some cross over and some don't, even if they're the same people in a similar, different people in a similar situation?
Well, I think it all comes down to personal choice. And some people may stay behind for various reasons. They think they could help their loved ones deal with the grief, which is actually, it's better if they cross over as a spirit, and they can do it much better, much more effectively that way. Others, I find that people who are religiously conservative, very conservative, are often the ones that stay behind because they're actually afraid to cross over. Because of they get an awakening when they die about all the things, how they live their life, and even the smallest thing that they may have offended somebody or hurt somebody, they think it will prevent them from going on.
Wow!
So they stay behind as an earthbound ghost.
Basically, a self-induced imprisonment or self-induced confinement.
Exactly. Yes.
So it becomes very important, which is why so many indigenous and other cultures like the Buddhists and the Tibetans and the Egyptian place so much emphasis on preparing the living for the dying, and went to such great lengths to help guide a deceased soul cross over after the body's death.
Yes, that makes perfect sense.
So then what causes poltergeists?
Poltergeists are basically energy generated by the living that mimics ghostly manifestations. So, and I've had a number of cases with the Inspired Ghost Tracking Group of Maryland where usually it's someone in emotional turmoil or hormonal change, usually teenagers, that are generating that kind of energy that simulate activity that a ghost would have.
You don't think that it's because I've interviewed other mediums, and another perspective is that the ghosts are present and the adolescent or the energy emitted by its hormonal, as you point out, most of them say it often happens around teenage girls in particular, that it's they're not giving energy to the ghosts to do their deeds?
Oh, it could also be that, but I think that generally the way I think of poltergeist is energy created by the living that will that could certainly enhance a ghost, because ghosts feed on energy, so emotional energy or physical energies. So that would certainly lend itself to empowering a ghost to do more.
Mm-hmm. And I've also, and we'll move on real quickly to your book and your content, but I always think some of these background points are vital to keep going over. One of the reasons bars are such unhealthy places, besides that they lead to alcoholism often, is that alcoholic ghosts are often there because the addiction has prevented them from moving on. The desire is still so strong, and that they will actually encourage somebody to drink beyond their limit as a way to pleasure themselves. And people may not know it, but they go home with a monkey on their back, so to speak.
That's true, and there were plenty of haunted pubs in England, I will tell you.
Oh, I'm sure. Anyone in particular you want to talk about?
Well, there was one called Lord Moon of the Mall, and it was near Trafalgar Square. And but it actually wasn't someone who liked to imbibe that was there. It was actually someone who owned a shop there hundreds of years before it became a pub. Mm-hmm. And he was still working there, at least as a ghost.
Interesting. And so if you could describe to our audience, you mentioned, well, they can call your name 20 times behind your back and you'll turn around. Explain to us how it is you perceive a ghost when you do.
There are a number of ways that I can sense a ghost. I can usually I get a picture of them telepathically in my mind. I can hear them. Sometimes, on a rare occasion, I can actually see them with my eyes, but that's very rare. Mm-hmm. I can smell them. They share their pain of death often. So I've been hit, punched, stabbed, kicked, pushed downstairs. I've felt cancer, heart attacks.
Wow.
Hit by a block of cement, which is what happened to me in Hampton Court Palace, and quite a few other ways.
And how do you go about recentering yourself after you have this? Because those are energies. I mean, they're not nothing. There's no such...
Sure.
Yeah, and they are somehow or other entangled in your energy body in that instant. You must be a very strong, centered person.
I think it's the caffeine.
You mean that's what I'm missing in my life?
I attribute everything to coffee to keep me up standing straight.
That is so funny. Look, we're going to take a little break, then we're going to come back and spend the rest of our evening talking about Ghosts of England on a medium's vacation. Rob Gutro is our guest, Gutro. You can find his many books, www.ghostsandspiritsinsights.blogspot.com. And don't forget, all of our guests and their websites and links are at the front of 21st21st, centuryradio.com.
Hello, this is Jim Tucker. I'm a child psychiatrist, and I'm the author of Return to Life, Extraordinary Cases of Children Who Remember Past Lives. You can learn more about it at www.jimbtucker.com. You are listening to 21st Century Radio with Dr. Zohara Hieronimus.
Welcome back to 21st Century 21st Century Radio. Rob Gutro is our guest. His recent book, Ghosts of England on a Medium's Vacation. It's a Create Space independent publishing platform, 2018 release. And links to his website can be found at www.21stcenturyradio.com. Now, one of the things, Rob, I think is really important, and I'm so glad you include it in your new book, Ghosts of England on a Medium's Vacation, is that ghosts rarely have interaction with the living and are almost never heard and helped. And you mentioned that the longer a ghost is stuck on Earth, it seems, the longer they linger, that they forget how to cross over. And I loved how respectful you are about dogs and humans, and I have to say nature beings who have died, because as you point out, some of the more current, you don't say this but imply it, some of the more current fad of going ghost hunting to make the ghost do something, to register something on equipment or to make something happen, is not helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's disrespectful to them. I really think that people need to keep in mind that any earthbound ghosts were once people or pets, and they need to be treated with the respect you would as if they were standing there in the physical right in front of you.
And if possible, somebody who can guide them, and even if you can't see them but you feel them, you can offer them the loving encouragement to say, go towards the light, rejoin your family who's already crossed over. If you see somebody who's 200 years old, you can be assured their family has already crossed over.
Absolutely. Yes. And I tried to do that whenever I encounter a ghost. Unfortunately, with some historic places discourage mediums from crossing ghosts over because it's more of an attraction to them, which is kind of sad. Mm-hmm. Because it's basically, to me, being a ghost is like being locked in a prison, an isolation cell for the rest of eternity. And that's just horrible.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned try to imagine what it would feel like, if everybody just thinking about this for a moment, what would it be like to be stuck in the same place, particularly when ghosts do hauntings, or they themselves re-experience their death or their hanging or somebody else they love, their child's murder, it doesn't matter. They're replaying that experience over and over.
Yes. And, to me, being an earthbound ghost would be absolute hell to see a Dunkin' Donuts and not be able to enjoy coffee for eternity.
A good reason enough to cross over, right, just to have a Dunkin' Donut. All right, so let's talk about some of the can we start with one that I really like? I want to start with the animal one. Do you mind?
No, absolutely. We love talking animals.
Yeah, well, I loved the part where you went to the Sir John Soane Museum. So talk to us about that experience.
Sure. John Soane was an architect. He was a very famous architect in England. He designed quite a number of things. And my husband, of course, is an architect, so that's the only reason we went there. Otherwise, I wouldn't know who he was. Uh-huh. So when we went in there, John Soane's house basically is like a museum. It is a museum now, but it was like a museum when he lived in it, because he was an avid collector of all things architectural. He even has a sarcophagus in his basement. There are some really odd things in there. I can only imagine how it was when he threw parties. He and his wife threw parties, and he had a lot to talk about. But as soon as I walked in the door, I sensed that there was a dog at the front door. And I looked at Tom and I said, there's a ghost here, and it's not human. I said, there's a dog here. And he said, okay, well, let's see if we can figure out who it is. So as we walked through, there was a little courtyard. There was windows that looked onto a little courtyard. And this was a townhouse, by the way, or a row house in England. So this architect created a courtyard that went all the way up to the outside. In the courtyard, there was a little tombstone, and it said Fanny. And I looked at Tom and I said, that is the dog. Mm-hmm. So we went into a gallery. And in the gallery, and by the way, this house has priceless paintings by many of the masters. In this gallery was a huge portrait of Mrs. Soane and this little black dog on her lap. And the inscription said, Mrs. Soane and Fanny, her beloved dog. Well, I knew that was who it is. Mm-hmm. when I got upstairs to the gift shop area, I asked one of the docents, and I said, do people report seeing a little dog in here? And she said, why, yes. And I said, would it be Fanny, the Soane's dog? And she said, yes. Many of the people who have worked here over the years have reported seeing Fanny. And she asked me if I sensed a human there, and I said, absolutely not. There's no human ghost. And she said, well, that's interesting because nobody else has seen a human ghost here, only the dog. And they've heard her nails, and she did say that when somebody bought the house after the Soanes passed, they had 2 dogs, and the 2 dogs were freaked out. Mm-hmm.
Well, dogs definitely see spirits, as you know.
Absolutely. So
I guess they also see ghosts.
Yes. So it turns out that the person who bought the house, had to actually put the dogs in another house.
Interesting. And why would you say, is it the same as with humans, that Fanny loved it there and feels it's her job to still protect the domicile or something?
Absolutely. That she loved it there. Mm-hmm. She loved running up and down all 3 floors, and she's still doing it. And now she has so many more playmates.
There's so many questions I have for you, but I don't want to forego not talking about one of the beautiful experiences you had, the unusual experiences. The Tower of London is a really good example of energetic remains and ghostings, like St. Bartholomew's Hospital, when you visited both. Talk to us about those, because they're both very intense places where lots of people died and not necessarily comfortable situations.
Sure. Well, St. Bart's is actually one place that I wasn't able to go into, but I could sense the energy just walking by it. Mm-hmm. It was late at night when we had walked by it. Right. But the Tower of London, we did explore during the day, and my gosh, there were a lot of ghosts in there. It was in the Tower of London where I met a queen, the ghost of a queen, right, which would be Anne Boleyn, who haunts the church there, and she's actually buried in that church there. It is the Chapel Royal of St. Peter ad Vincula. Try to say that 5 times fast.
Try to say it once.
Yeah. So in that actually particular church, there were a number of famous people that were buried there. Anne Boleyn, of course, Queen Catherine Howard, both queens of which lost their head to Henry VIII. Right. Lady Jane Grey and her husband, and George Boleyn, and Anne Boleyn's brother, is also buried in there.
Do you find, I mean, it might seem like a silly question, but with a fresh mind, I'm thinking, wow, all those ghosts there, do they all get together? I mean, do ghosts work with other ghosts who are even from different centuries? Do they recognize each other? Do they see each other?
It's been my experience that they actually don't see each other unless they're from the same period. Uh-huh. So certainly I think Anne Boleyn and her brother George would be able to interact with each other. But George's ghost isn't there. Mm-hmm. His body's there. But I ran into George Boleyn at Hever Castle. And George Boleyn actually walked through the entire castle with us. And
in that chapter you called him a ghost guide.
Yeah, he was my ghostly tour guide.
Uh-huh.
That was probably my most amazing experience.
Talk to us about it.
Well, Hever Castle is located in Kent, and that's about 30 miles southeast of London. And the reason that George was there, I learned after I got in there, is that it was actually the home of the Boleyn family. So that made perfect sense. As we walked in the front door, I immediately heard a male voice say to me, "I'm George." And I thought, okay, I don't know who George is. Nice to meet you, but I don't know who you are. So, and just as is this a
big castle?
It is huge. Yes. Yeah, actually, and it was purchased by William Waldorf Astor in 1903, the American millionaire. You may remember that name from the Titanic.
Yeah, of course.
So, and he repaired it, he fixed it and upgraded it, added gardens and so forth. So, just so you know, the premise of the trip was to go to all of these places in England to visit Tudor-era castles and locations, because Tom is an amateur historian on the Tudors and the Tudor period, Henry VIII. I, on the other hand, knew nothing about them.
Well, that actually makes for a very good experience, because you don't go with a whole lot of, logical information already data banked in your brain.
Yes. So of course, when I heard a male ghost say, "My name is George," I looked at him and I said, "Who is George?" I said, "Would you have any idea who George would be?" And he said, "Of course. That would be George Boleyn. That would be Anne's brother." Mm-hmm. I thought, oh my gosh, what is he here for? By the way, in history, George was accused of having incest with his sister Anne. And Henry VIII was responsible for that, of course, because he wanted to have Anne executed. Anyway, as we went through the castle, George conveyed various things to me. He told me that he had burned his elbow in a fireplace as a child, and he made me feel pain in my elbow, which is what ghosts do sometimes. Mm-hmm. He told me that he was innocent of having sexual relations with his sister, and then he gave me a date. He said 1532 is when he was most proud of his sister, and of course, I wrote it down, and I have no idea what that meant. When I got home, I found out that in 1532, the king had bestowed Anne the title of Marquess of Pembroke, and she became a royal with that title. So it was no wonder that he was proud of her in that year.
It's wonderful confirmation. I mean, that's why when I did my book on white spirit animals, I dreamt with them before studying anything about their biology or their cultures, etc., so that whatever I got would be authentic and sort of undisturbed by rational information. So it's wonderful that you have that opportunity to go to some places without knowing much about them, and then can confirm your senses. And that's what good mediums, good psychics try to do, and remote viewers. It's the same process where you do your work without wondering whether or not this is true or not, and then you can afterwards make some efforts to confirm the information you've been given. And it's a very wonderful journeying process, I find anyway. I like that.
Yes, it's like putting puzzle pieces together. And I learned an awful lot of history when I was researching the answers to who these ghosts were.
Of course.
And of course, during my journeys, I write about how I met 2 queens and a prince and a nobleman and royal guards. I had a screaming queen run through me at Hampton Court Palace. I had a guard walk through me and give me the chills in another location. It was just an amazing vacation.
What was your overall impression? I mean, if you were to summarize, when we go to a foreign country and we go, oh, the Greeks are really robust and fun and love their food, what would you say about all these ghosts?
I think there's a lot of people that need to be crossed over and achieve peace. There was so much pain and torture and anxiety, especially during the Tudor period, that these ghosts, some of them want justice, others just got trapped here. It's a lot of tragedy to me.
Well, there's been discussion among mediums worldwide of concern when there's wars and future plagues or tsunamis, or just what we see from hurricanes and flooding in Haiti when, so many thousands of people died, that it's not easy for whole groups of people to cross over simultaneously. People have talked about it like a traffic jam. There's a backup. What's your impression about that when large masses of people die simultaneously?
I've come to find out that many of them do cross over because often our relatives in spirit will come for us.
Right.
It's just like people in the hospital room dying slowly. They'll often report seeing someone on the other side that they're related to. And the same goes for pets, by the way. When you make the decision to help a pet cross over, usually it's one of your human relatives or another pet that has passed before that is waiting in the light for them to help them cross over. So,
it's interesting. I had to put my beloved Oxford to sleep last December, and the first thing he said to me after he was out of his body, he was looking at his own body in the grave, and he said, "Who put that there?" That's what he said. He said, "Who put that there? Like, what is it doing in there?" Anyway, I have a lot to share on that on another occasion. It was quite an experience. I do want to tell you one thing that I learned from Oxford. He became a guide on the other side for animals here that have suffered and been tortured, just like humans, and that there's like these animal hospitals where there are also humans that work with the deceased spirits of animals who have passed over, who don't believe that any humans can ever be nice. And they go through a process of literally just being touched. That's the most they can even stand, is just have a human touch them. And so that there are these whole places of restoration, like others have described for the humans, where animals are literally prepared for reincarnation themselves. I couldn't have dreamed that up. I didn't dream it up. That's what he showed me.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's very heartening to know that, Anyway, so back to this issue of a break. That's what the producer's saying. Back to this issue of a break. That's what we're going to do. We're going to take a little break, and then we'll come back to some of the churches, because, as you're right, churches have ghosts, and for myriad reasons. If you've just joined us, Rob Gutro, Gutro, as his last name, has joined us. He's written numerous books that we've covered in the past: Pets in the Afterlife, Lessons Learned from Talking to the Dead, Ghosts and Spirits, and you can find them at www.ghostsandspiritsinsights.blogspot.com.
Hi, this is Roberta Grimes, author of The Fun of Dying and The Fun of Staying in Touch. You can learn much more at my website, robertagrimes.com. And if you're interested in learning a lot more, my podcasts are available for free on iTunes as Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes. Meanwhile, you're listening to 21st Century Radio with the wonderful Dr. Zohara Hieronimus.
Welcome back to 21st Century Radio. And first caller, 410-922-6680. That's 410-922-6680. Or 1-800-922-6680 if you know the name of our guest, and it doesn't matter if you pronounce it two separate ways like I did. You'll be a winner of his book, Ghosts of England on a Medium's Vacation. All right, so coming back to churches, because you visited churches, and you point out that churches have ghosts for myriad reasons, quote unquote. What are some of those reasons?
Well, some of the reasons are that people are either devoted to their religious order, like the monks I met in Westminster Abbey, or some of the parishioners are afraid to cross over because of what they may have done in their life. And there's a monk at St. Bartholomew's, that was very dedicated to his life there, so he wanted to stay in the church. And then there is the other side of the coin, which happened in Canterbury, about Thomas Becket, who was murdered in the cathedral there, Canterbury Cathedral.
And so how did you experience that?
Well, when we went to Canterbury Cathedral, as soon as we walked in, I sensed that there was a kind of a haughty man. He was kind of stubborn, and I didn't know who he was. And of course, I didn't know anything about Canterbury Cathedral. The man was very kind of bullheaded, and I learned later that he was a friend of the king. I believe it was Henry II, and Henry II appointed him the Archbishop of Canterbury in 1162, and then Thomas Becket went against the king. So the king is famously known to say, "Who will rid me of this meddling priest?" So 4 knights took that as a directive and went to the cathedral and killed Becket in there. Mm-hmm. So So Becket was very headstrong against the king, and to this day he still walks around. There's a marker actually in the floor, and that's where I sensed his energy, and he's still got the same personality.
You know, it occurs to me that people might be wondering, these are all ghosts in England, so they speak English. What is your experience like when you go to a foreign country that doesn't speak English and you engage a ghost? You mentioned they communicate telepathically. Does it matter what language you personally know?
It does in some instances. What's interesting is that some ghosts will convey their feelings to me. So with feelings, they really don't need words. But other ghosts, I actually just came back from a vacation in Spain. I heard in Spanish words. Fortunately, I speak Spanish, so I was able to understand what they were saying. But when I went to Quebec, I didn't understand French, and there were some ghosts there also. So I could read their emotions, but I couldn't understand what they were saying. Interesting.
That's quite distinct. What about the ghostly mystery at Thornbury Castle?
Well, that was kind of jarring because Thornbury Castle is actually now a kind of a luxury bed and breakfast. It was a castle that was built during the Tudor time and Edward Stafford was the gentleman who built the castle, and he was seen as a threat by Henry VIII. So, of course, as Henry liked to do, he had Edward Stafford executed because Stafford mounted a plot against the king. So Henry VIII took over the castle. But here's the thing about that. Stafford never got to complete the castle. It was unfinished. So there were only two parts that were completed, and those are now a luxury bed and breakfast. The rest of it looks like it was in ruins, but it really just wasn't finished. Mm-hmm. So we stayed there, and our room was haunted.
I know what that's like. I've stayed at bed and breakfasts. I took my stepdaughter, Marae, and we went on a whole trip in North Carolina through all of these various places and, restored barns and things. And each place, I'm not kidding, had some residual ghost. It got to the point where we finally cut our travel short by 2 days because we just didn't have the energy I didn't have the energy to deal with another haunted bed and breakfast. It was really that simple.
I totally understand that. Did you was your sleep disturbed?
Totally. What? I mean, okay. I remember this one place we went, I don't remember the name of it, in Pennsylvania, but it had been a very wealthy man in this little poor town, and it was the only big house in the whole place, and we slept in what had been their library, and he was there the whole time. And then and then what happens to me is I become aware of other things, particularly a woman who had lived there and had a very frustrated life. In her room, when they first showed us where they wanted us to stay, I said, I'm not staying in there. That's too depressing. I could just feel her, mourning the loss of a marriage, not getting married, being alone, da-da-da. And then he said, okay, well, you can stay in the library. Wasn't necessarily better. He wasn't depressed. He was just very anxious about what had happened to his home, and his land had been sold off, and there was a highway now, and, all kinds of changes to his property.
Oh, my gosh. It's amazing what they can convey.
Well, and then I had a house that was haunted actually by, I believe, a captain of a sailing ship during the French Revolution and crashed out in the Chesapeake Bay. Went down in the Chesapeake Bay and ended up in a house down the Magathie River. And I tracked who I thought he was, a DuPont actually. And I used to talk to him because visitors would be really scared. They'd hear somebody walking down the hallway and they'd feel something and run past the room where we were pretty certain he held up. But I talked to him at length about crossing over and that his wife and his children, I could see them just waiting for him. And all he kept saying is, they're going to take off my head. And he was so afraid to cross over because he thought he was going to be executed for the loss of the ship.
Wow.
That all sounds familiar to you, though, doesn't it?
It does.
I know. The audience is probably going, listen to these guys. What are they, making this stuff up? So talk to us about that, the difference between when you're imagining versus when you're perceiving.
Oftentimes I'll feel physical sensations, mm-hmm. So I know that I'm experiencing something. when I'm perceiving something, I will often ask another sensitive person if they are feeling anything and to describe it. So I always look for confirmation. And fortunately, my husband also has medium abilities, which actually woke up in Westminster Abbey. We both had several experiences there because he didn't have the ability until we went to London.
You want to tell us a little bit about the experience?
Sure. So I'm going to go back for just a second and say the chapter of my haunted hotel room was quite an uncovery of history to figure out the identity of Rupert, the name of the ghost. And so you'll find that fascinating as you read through history. In terms of Westminster Abbey, Tom did not have abilities until we went into Westminster Abbey. Then suddenly he started feeling queasy, and he started smelling a rotting corpse. What he thought smelled like a rotting corpse. At the same time, he asked me if I felt anything, and I did. I had a headache, which is usually my sign that there's a ghost. So we started acting as confirmation. As we stood 10 feet apart from each other, looking at the tomb of Anne of Cleves, we both got our hair pulled from different sides, as if a ghost was standing right between us.
Yeah.
That was really startling.
Yeah. Well, and for anybody in the audience, and I'm sure there are people listening who are going, well, I've experienced a ghost and it scared me to death. That's always what everybody goes. And I always think to myself, isn't that great? They're already dead and they're scaring us to death. But I think the most important thing I just want to emphasize again is that when we do encounter ghosts, or when anybody in the audience feels there's a presence of a deceased loved one that is not spirit, but is really trapped and suffering, there are very gentle things you can do, which is just to tell them that love is available to them. What else can somebody do who isn't a practiced rescuer? I mean, it's not something to take lightly, but it's also no different than praying for somebody that's alive and suffering.
Absolutely. And prayer is positive energy. So what people can do if they encounter a ghost is they could tell them to go to places where there may be a light opening, which would be like a funeral home or a hospital, something like that, so that they can also use that portal to go to the other side.
What do you mean by there are places of light at hospitals or churches and other places?
Just places where people are continually passing away.
Okay.
Because people's loved ones always help cross people over.
And enormous angel guardians over hospitals and other places. I mean, not just humans, but other beings that are guardians for humans.
Sure, absolutely. And that even goes in for vets' offices, too, veterinarians' offices. Because I had to bring that up because of the pet thing.
No, it's important. I walked into a vet's office one day and I asked them, I said, did you just put a cat to sleep? And they said, yes. Why? I said, well, it's flying around the ceiling. It was so excited to be out of its body. I was just concerned that it didn't get stuck there. That it didn't go, now where do I go? I'm stuck here in the vet's office. But it wasn't stuck. But there's an excitement for animals often when they first shed their body. There's a kind of, I don't know that they go through the same kind of trauma sometimes that humans do.
Sure. And I find that when people and pets pass, right at that instant, there tends to be a little blackout period so that they just wake up on the other side. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they don't know what happened.
You also have a beautiful story in here. And by the way, we do have a winner who rightly pronounced Rob Gutro, Gutro. I love the story about your husband, Tom's friend, Ed, that a spirit actually helped you while you were dealing with ghosts, the spirit being a deceased being who is light energy and full of love and available to us anywhere and anywhen.
Sure, and I always joke with Tom that there's three people in our relationship, me, him, and Ed, because Ed is always around. I never met Ed in life, but Ed is always very active, always watching out for us. And that was one of my favorite stories. Our GPS went haywire, and it turned out that Ed answered one of my longtime requests, which was I always wanted to meet him in person. And sure enough, over the hill came a Royal Mail truck, and the man that got out of the Royal Mail truck looked just like Ed would have likely looked had he lived. It said, when the guy got out of the mail truck, it sent chills through my spine. And I went over the car and I said, Tom, we just have to follow him out. He will take us out to the highway. And he said, did you see him? He looks like Ed would have looked like if he were still alive today. Just chilling. And spirits do that. They send lookalikes to let us know that they're there to help.
What else would you like to share from the book? There's so many other things that we haven't touched on, but I don't want to ask more questions. What's important to you about this entire effort?
Oh my gosh. I guess for anybody that's interested in ghosts, for anybody that's interested in history, I've tried to educate you on all of the places and what their purpose was and so forth. You'll learn about queens and princes and noblemen and how and history. I also have a story in there from a person who works at Hampton Court Palace. He shared his own ghost story in there, and a link to a video. I actually videotaped him when I was there, and I had him tell his story. So it's not a history book. It's not just a book on ghosts. It's a book about that you won't find these stories anywhere else, because these are my experiences with all the ghosts that I met. And I hope it inspires people, once they read this, to go to England and to experience what they can themselves.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful guide. I loved, by the way, the Pure Magic shop that's haunted on St. Peter Street, which has
Yes.
3 ghosts. I mean, why not? Well, of course. And so when you look back at this journey, we only have about 30 seconds. How did it change you?
It just made me aware that there are a lot more ghosts that are lingering for different reasons than we are aware of.
Mm-hmm. And it's our good job to pray for them to find the light.
Yes, we need to help them cross over.
Thank you so much, Rob, for being a wonderful guest as always. Well, we look forward to your revisiting. Rob Gutro, www.ghostsandspiritsinsights.blogspot.com.
Stay connected with stimulating talk and breaking news on Talk Radio 680 WCBM, Baltimore, and WCBM.com. He will